Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us for today's Manulife Business Success Series webinar on workplace mental health during COVID-19. My name is Allison Mitchell, and I'm the Program Manager for the Access Student Talent Program at the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people, as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors. A special thank you to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, which is Manulife, and our platinum sponsor for the series, which is the Immigration Partnership. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. I would now like to welcome Bianca Moldovan, Corporate Social Responsibility Manager with Manulife, to say a few words.
Thank you, Allison. On behalf of Manulife, thank you all for joining us here today. We are very proud to sponsor the Manulife Business Success Series, bringing together experts in our community and a rotating series of topics. We're very excited to have one of our very own Jillian Wells with us today to begin the discussion around workplace mental health during COVID-19. I'll leave it to Jillian to get into the details. However, I did want to take a moment and recognize Manulife and the commitment it's had to its employees, especially during this time. While the organization has always encouraged work-life balance and strive to strike that healthy balance, it has especially come through during this time and the pandemic. The flexibility and ease to adjust your hours to accommodate school, kids, and all the many things that have popped up during this time is greatly appreciated. Not to mention the Employee Assistance Program, which does support our employees for $10,000 of mental health services and coverage per year per employee. So during the pandemic, that has been incredibly grateful for a lot of people and has been used. So I will hand it back over to you, Allison, for Jillian to get into the details. But thank you all for joining us here today, and I am excited to learn more from you, Jillian.
Thank you so much, Bianca. We're thrilled to have Manulife on board for this series as we work to support local businesses through this time. Before the session starts, I have a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so that we can reduce any background noise. If you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, you can type them into the questions box in your control panel at any time. If your questions are technical in nature, then someone from our team will be with you momentarily. If your questions are for our presenter, then we'll have some time at the end for our presenter to answer your questions. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on our Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber site. I'm now very pleased to welcome Jillian Wells. Jillian is a registered social worker with over 20 years of counseling experience working in counseling agencies and on her own private practice. Jillian's area of expertise is in workplace mental health, assisting clients facing various mental health issues that often lead to disabilities such as trauma, depression, anxiety, and stress, and has delivered numerous presentations to large organizations on workplace mental health as well as EAP mental health workshops. Jillian has taught part-time at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Waterloo and provides case supervision to psychotherapists in Kitchener-Waterloo region. Most importantly, Jillian is a mental health specialist on the National Disability Best Practices at Manulife. In her role, she supports several AMCS, STD, and LTD teams, carries out deep dives, and presents at conferences on the subject matter of mental health and return to work. Please join me in welcoming Jillian to today's webinar. Thank you so much, Jillian, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Allison.
So we'll get started. We have heard so much about mental health during COVID, and I just wanted to know what you've noticed at Manulife as a mental health specialist in terms of mental illness and disability trends.
Well, so what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about is not only some of the trends I see as a mental health specialist reviewing over mental health disability claims, and I review close between 800 to 1,000 a year, but also to try and incorporate some statistics and research around what we know. So, research has shown, which I don't think anybody would be surprised at, that during this pandemic, just about basically everybody's experiencing a higher level of stress. Again, likely not surprising for too many people. And what research tries to do is it tries to reach back and say, where's the comparable? Have we ever had that before? And looking at a past pandemic, if we remember, is SARS, right? And also looking at other natural disasters. And what did the research find? Because it's always important to start there. And what the research did find is that after a pandemic such as SARS or a natural disaster occurs, that there's an increase in anxiety, depression, people experiencing more insomnia, distress, and malaise in their lives, as well as severity of conditions such as PTSD and maladaptive coping behaviors such as a substance use disorder. So a global pandemic is so different than a natural disaster because oftentimes with a natural disaster, it's geographically located in one area or another. But when you think of the nature of what we're experiencing with COVID, there is fear and concern around catching it. There's fear of concern, of course, around protecting ourselves and loved ones and members of our community. There is the ever-changing rules and understanding and trying to adapt to those things. And in order to do that, we're plugged into the news all the time, whether the news be on TV or on your phone, because there is so much changing. We all want to stay afloat with what's going on. So therefore, there's this really natural impact on the mental health, hence so much research and studies. Now, we're also really fortunate to have had some really recent research carried out. So there was the COVID-related mental health impact on Canadian surveys, and it's about 3,000 participants. They did one in April, which was shortly when a lot of our shutdowns were occurring, and another one in October. And they were highlighting, amongst other things, some of the stressors that were experienced. So here are the three that they highlighted in this particular survey that they found from respondents. And one is the impact of the financial. And that's not surprising, again, due to the impact on our economy and in terms of jobs. The second one was the fear of contracting the virus. Again, very almost common sense, right? Like who would not have that fear around that? The third one is the social isolation. And I actually ranked that as one of the highest impacts on mental health in terms of ongoing, as they found out in October. So those are some significant pieces that we have to keep in mind when it comes to around mental health and COVID. So when I take a look at the work that I'm doing and looking at the mental health disability claims, what am I seeing there? Well, in the claims that I review, I'm seeing that in terms of impact on terms of people's mental health, it's across occupation, age, gender, and other demographics. What are people experiencing? Well, you have anticipatory fear. Anticipatory fear is if somebody's off on leave and away from the workplace with a mental health condition, it's what they're anticipating and they're fearful about when it comes to returning back to work. There's heightened levels of anxiousness. Some people who have a history of trauma have been triggered. There's the challenge of the work-life balance, especially if there are children, various ages at home and engaging with whatever type of schooling's going on. There could be aging parents as well too, and the lingering effects, the otherwise known as pandemic fatigue. Now, there are different definitions of pandemic fatigue, but what this survey did find out that in October, all these months in, people, it's not that they're so much tired of it in the sense of a flippant lightweight, they're actually weighed down by it. They're weighed down by the burden of it and resulting in the news coming in and again, all these changing rules and trying to keep up and just one added thing on top of another. So what ends up happening is these pieces end up being complicating factors, meaning that when we're looking at trying to get people back to work after being on a disability for a mental health claim, within the context of COVID, these factors complicate their eventual recovery. So what we see in the claims, what we see in the research and the stats and the surveys tell us is all of this, but we really need to be careful about what is really going on behind the curtains.
I muted myself there. You can still hear me?
Oh, that's
okay.
all
right. Great. So you mentioned what is behind the curtain. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so that's kind of a term of that what we actually see or what people show us about their lives in contrast to what's really happening. So just think of something like social media. You know, what's presented in terms of highlights of our lives, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, or whatever it is that you do. It's this notion of I'm really doing well, right? The appearance of doing well and being well no matter what. However, what we notice in the mental health field is that there is a difference between how people present themselves, that kind of public image, versus how they genuinely feel. There is that discrepancy. And the result of that discrepancy, why it's so important for us as mental health practitioners, is that we find that people are suffering in silence and alone, as it were, behind the curtains. And this is even made worse due to COVID and the various restrictions that are going on. So we end up seeing that people are walking out like the walking wounded.
Mm-hmm. And can you elaborate on what you mean by walking wounded?
Well, the walking wounded is actually, it has emerged from the research. So when they looked at mental health and people specifically around, and this goes for most of all the other conditions as well too, people who experience moderate to severe depression, the number of people who actually access treatment in terms of employees, only half of the employees with moderate to severe symptoms sought out treatment. And that's significant because the same research showed that if they did seek out treatment, 80% would improve. So in summary, 80%, this research found that 80% of employees would improve if they got the treatment, but only half went out and got the treatment. So from a mental health and recovery arena, that is very concerning discrepancy. So in terms of the walking wounded, we see that people are experiencing a level of mental distress, but they've not sought out appropriate care and treatment. So hence they're wounded. I see this all the time in private practice. So as a therapist, someone will come to me with a problem and let's just say they're about 45 years old. And I'll say, well, how long have you been struggling with this? It's not uncommon for people to say, in my 20s, but this is the first time I'm seeking help. So you really start to see that really wide discrepancy. Now, why do we call it the walking? Well, they're still able to function, but they do so with impairment. So from a business point of view, we're really familiar with absenteeism, when people are away from work. But there's also presenteeism. And that's when a worker shows up at work when they're unwell and shouldn't be there. And in fact, research has shown that that actually presenteeism costs the labor force much, much more than absenteeism. So I know that oftentimes I'll sit in meetings and they'll talk about headcounts and having enough people to carry out either a project or a certain amount of work. And I've heard the expression, you know, we need X number of bums in the seats. And I always say as a mental health person in my head, yeah, you can have bums in the seats, but if the heads aren't in the game, then you're going to have some problems,
Very
right?
true.
Right. And so why does it cost so much more? Because people, you know, you might think, well, they've showed up at work. How can it cost so much more? Well, there's three things to consider. That if somebody who's unwell is at work, do you have a reduction in productivity? You know, you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you have symptoms, and you're just sort of going through the motions. Secondly, there's the potential for costly mistakes and errors to occur, which can be quite significant. And third being, it actually, for a worker who's not well to show up at work, going through the motion, it really slows their recovery. If they stepped away from the work, got the appropriate treatment and care, the opportunity to have a full and sustained recovery and successful return to work is much, much higher. So in the mental health world, and we see this in mental health disability claims, we see, again, people struggling with symptoms but failing to access the appropriate treatment. It's a help-seeking behavior, and it is unique to the mental health conditions. So If somebody had the misfortune of falling down the stairs and breaking their arm, you wouldn't even think, people are going to go get the medical attention and get what they need to get a cast or whatever it is that they need. Unfortunately, we don't see that trend in mental health claims. People stay for a very long time, are trying to be heroic, trying to toughen it out, trying to be stoic, and trying to do this on their own. And oftentimes this is influenced by stigma. There's
Mhm.
still a lot of stigma around people admitting
Mhm.
that they're struggling, admitting that they have a mental health, people accepting that they have a diagnosis. And which is why I'm always happy when, whether it be on social media, my phone, or on television or the radio, we hear various organizations talking about, let's talk about mental health. Let's be more
Mhm.
open about it. Look at suicide prevention and other types of awareness coming out. Because the more we talk about this, is the more we get to reduce the level of stigma. So going back to that same research around the mental health index regarding COVID that happened both in April and October. Unfortunately, they came up with an even more troubling statistic. Sounds kind of doom and gloom, but
Mhm.
we want to pay attention to these. And what they discovered was a quarter of the respondents indicated that they're less likely to access mental health care and support now than before the pandemic.
Mhm.
So you would think, but hold up, we just talked about all the stress and the insomnia and the substance abuse and all those things. Why aren't people now, and heightened discussion, why aren't people now getting more treatment? And I was able to sort of discover three things. One, it's the stigma still. It's that overarching piece around, well, we're all experiencing this. Why do I need to go get help? But I don't see other people getting help. So there's that stigma, right? That negative understanding of mental health and treatment. Second thing is it can be cost prohibitive for some people, especially if they've lost their job or there's been a reduction in income in their household. And Allison, just remind me at the end of it, we could talk about resources and whatnot.
Mhm.
The third thing, which I think is really specific to COVID, is lack of privacy. So if people are working from home and they're not everybody has the luxury of living in a very large home. They may not have that measure of privacy to have those conversations. They may not even be in safe situations where they can have those conversations. So those are just the three that came out of this, but there's probably likely some more. So it is really interesting to see that, unfortunately, we're just not getting as many people taking an uptake in health and treatment like they should.
Thank you for pointing that out because in all honesty, we're hearing so much more about mental health and ensuring that we're caring for our mental health, especially during the pandemic, that I was actually going to ask you whether we're seeing an uptick in the number of people who are accessing mental health supports. So it is troubling that we're seeing a decrease, but those reasons all make really good sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to tackle one of those. There's a solution to that. And before I sort of jumble over myself and go a little bit backwards, I'll definitely be able to tease out a little bit more what can be done to get rid of those barriers.
Okay, great. So as we know, COVID-19 has changed how we're working, and many people are working from home. I know the Chamber team is working from home. So can you talk a little bit about what the benefits and the challenges are to working from home, and from what you're seeing, how are people coping with this?
Well, great question, because the impact of COVID, we know, has really pivoted like the workplace, which I have to say internally is kind of our rehab specialists, which we use to help get people back to work, are sort of chuckling to themselves because for years in trying to get people to go back, accommodate people back to work, they've had discussions with many organizations. They said, no, we can never work from home. That's an impossibility. But obviously the possibility is now occurring. So there's a lot more arrangements of working from home, right? And definitely there are benefits and challenges. So in terms of benefits, again, probably things that people already know, but that work-life balance, right? Eliminating that commute, whatever that commute looked like. KW is getting bigger, so even the commute to get across town is still a commute nonetheless.
Yeah.
Cutting down on those external costs, your gas, your coffee, dry cleaning,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. My husband and I make a joke of how long we can keep the tank of gas in our car without actually, using it. I think I'm down to the last whatever, 10 kilometers. We'll see how that goes. But, you know, because we're just not, you know, using it, right? There's also the convenience, you know. Some of us, we can go for a run or do something in our lunchtime, or get a load of laundry in, or start to prep a meal or things like that. So, you know, those are the benefits. Unfortunately, I would say that the challenges are a longer list. And I'm sure I'm going to get some head nodding, because I know, Allison, I could see you, so I'm sure there can be other head nods. The repetition without change when you're working from home, right? Boredom, difficulty focusing on work, more fatigue at the end of the day, which is a little bit ironic, because someone could argue and say, well, Julian, if I don't have the commute and I'm not running around, well, it's a different type of a fatigue that sets in as a result of repetition and boredom. You sort of think of when you go on vacation. You don't find yourself sometimes staying up all night. Sometimes just the relaxation of the quiet, it just becomes a little bit, you get a little bit tired. So that we're noticing people commenting on. My favorite challenge is I'm closer to the kitchen, so I'm accessing food unnecessarily. When all of this started up, I was at the kitchen because it was a little bit central. I had one of those sit stands. I thought I was being novel. I thought it was a short term, and there's that mindless eating. So that had to shift. Access to news. I think I can even hear it on my colleagues when I can hear the news playing in the background. You start off in the morning, you may be at lunchtime, dinner. Again, we need to access it in terms of knowing what's going on, but sometimes people fail to turn it off and just use it as background noise. Another challenge is loneliness. That is really, really significant. You think about a workplace, and you think about the water cooler chat, as it were. This opportunity to walk down to the cafeteria or grab a coffee with somebody. Those social, casual interactions are really, really significant. And we really are missing that. Of course, we have right now the opportunity to contact people, but it is nuanced and quite differently. Here in Manulife, for example, we have a WhatsApp. And so I can look and see, oh, is Allison available? She's got a green dot. Or you have a red dot says you're busy, or do not disturb, or yellow says that you're away. But then I'd actually have to look, is Allison available? And then click and call. And there's a huge intentionality. And if it's a red dot, well, maybe I don't want to bother Allison. But lo and behold, if we were in the office and you were in a cubicle beside me and you were typing, I just come over and lean over and just sort of have a chat with you regardless. So there is that much more intentionality. And when it comes to that loneliness piece, we are hearing from colleagues and coworkers who live alone, who are saying that this is further amplified by COVID, because they would say, so in Manulife, we've always had a history of many opportunities to work from home, and they've said this is why we've always gone into the office. So now that we are solely restricted to working from home, being alone is further amplified. Now, if life was not a paradox, it's nothing at all. So the other side of the coin when it comes to challenging is living with people. So depending, it doesn't matter really what your home structure is. Married, roommates, kids, you know, third generations. I'm hearing of young people moving back home with grandparents. In fact, I have to share, I was in a yoga class, and 4 people set up, and they were all grandparents, and they were like, oh, our children have come back with their 3 children. And so people are talking about these new intergenerational families forced upon them. I mean, living conditions forced upon them because of COVID. So what ends up happening is you're not able to get away. You lack sufficient space, right? Before, there was, you get up, do whatever it is to get ready, the commute, get home. Maybe there was soccer practice, a hockey game, piano lessons. If you didn't have kids, maybe you had yoga, or you went for, you know, you had met up with some folks for after work drinks, or whatever the case may be. Had a bit of a busy routine to help break out that intensity of the relationship. And what the research is finding, that even the best of relationships are currently strained because of that kind of forced condition. If everybody, especially if everybody in the household is working from home and the children are in some type of hybrid version of being at home, right? So there's that kind of roller coaster that we have been on. So on one side of the coin, there is the impact of that loneliness. And on the other side is, I can't get away.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is some of the struggle from work from home.
And I would have to say that I really resonate with the latter. So I love my alone time. I love my people in my house, but I love my alone time too. And since COVID, just not getting quite as much of it. So I find that is actually more fatiguing for me because my alone time was where I re-energized and recharged. So that point definitely resonates with me.
Exactly. And that's so good to be so self-aware so that you can actually, zone in. And I did a lunch and learn for our staff in disability. And they said, well, what do you do? I said, well, I have a closet. I go in there and I lie down. And they laughed. And I said, no, like seriously, if I'm just sort of feeling, like, and it's a bit humorous, but you're going to have to, people for self-care have to find that time. So you got to recognize it and then find some type of solution if you're able to.
Yeah. And so we've talked about working from home, which is a great option for many, but there are certainly people that are not able to work from home. There are businesses and jobs that they have to operate on the front lines. And so can you talk a little bit about what challenges the workers might be facing who are working in the public during COVID?
Well, as you can imagine, it is challenging is the key word. Interacting with the public, I think, is a challenging aspect. But then you have the nature of the virus. You have the changing rules, and maybe not people always behaving at their best. And I'm not referring to those things that we see in terms of social media and kind of that extreme behavior, but I think just I was trying to find a word for it. And it was almost like testy, that we're all a little bit maybe not on our best behavior at this time. So I'll start off with what I'm noticing in the disability claims, because in the disability claims that we review in terms of mental health, we have a lot of clients, and some of them are retail. So I get to look at what people are saying in terms of returning to work, back to work as customer-facing workers. And what they've shared is that they've said that their concern about returning back to work is concern about the public not following proper protocol. Very legitimate, fair. But in hindsight, and as I was preparing this material, I think I saw a little bit more of that in the beginning, when there was a much more higher level of the unknown. For the most part, which is why I love doing local talks, KW, I'm out and about, I would say probably we've got a really nice compliant in how we, in terms of customers and what we do in terms of all the rules and regulations, so forth. This other concern surprised me, but it got further backed up by some news I actually read from the Region of Waterloo Public Health that I saw online literally minutes before coming on. So the second concern that we see in disability claims is people said that they were concerned that their colleagues were not following proper protocol. They said, I have no problem dealing with the public, but then I go into the lunchroom and they're taking off their masks and they're not social distancing. And one person said, well, they were just telling me about all the parties they were going to. And so I said, I can deal with the public, but it was my colleagues. And just before coming online, I was actually reading that in the region they were starting to make some statements around a bit of a relaxing that might be occurring in some workplaces amongst colleagues, and I thought that was interesting. I think there's a little bit more to explore, but there's some validity there. I think also when it comes to individuals working with the public is the potential to have to confront people now, right? Especially in the beginning with masks. Again, we don't have that extreme behavior, but I thought of my husband had gone away in the late fall, and we had gone to a hotel, and but there was a lot of outdoor experience, and somebody was not wearing their mask appropriately, and this hotel person had to confront them, and it ended all well. But I thought, well, that's another aspect of your job that maybe you didn't think you now need to do, which is, ma'am, sir, I need you to, excuse me, wear your mask properly. And then I think of my going abouts in the region. Each store has their own protocol. I've been in places where, again, I've had to stand in line outside. I remember one instance, a gentleman went in, was not wearing a mask. He came out. I don't know what the interaction was like, but when I went in, you could see that the people, the cashier and the other salespeople were quite visibly distressed. Some places you can go in and there's a little bit more people that can go into the store. Some places, you can put your food on the conveyor belt. Some places you sort of have to wait. I remember I went to one grocery store that I normally do not go to, and I've sort of figured out where lines go. And I remember going, oh, look at the cashier's open. I made a beeline straight to the cashier, and he was horrified. And a lady came and said, no, 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 the lineup is this way. And it was such a long line. And I literally turned around. I think I had 15 eyes on me, and they were all just, I think, evil eyes on me. But it was this idea, and of course, I scurried off and I apologized. But it's this idea that what we used to take for granted as everyday experiences are become a little bit more heavier. They're more burden laden. It's like, I'm just going to go to the stores that I know because I don't know the protocols and how to do this and how to do that at other places. So it's just an added mental burden. And so if it's stressful to a customer, you can imagine what it's like and how stressful it would be for a customer facing worker. So just in terms of workers who have to interact with the public, remember that they're coming from their own stressors, whether it be living with people or living alone, um, so on and so forth. And then it's further compounded with the impact on the volume of business. Some businesses, it might be doing really well. Other businesses may be struggling. The changing rules on enforcements of the various rules that they have to do inside of their establishment now, and customers who may or may not be testy, for lack of a better word. So with the inability or the option of work from home, those workers who work with the public are definitely finding it a very trying and challenging time right now.
Absolutely. And so how do we maintain mentally healthy workplaces, and how can businesses best support their workers?
Okay, this is a great question. This is a great question also if you don't have a big HR department or you don't have a massive disability. There's just so many things that can be done if you own a business, medium to small size, as it were. First of all, as an employer, you want to recognize the potential strain on your workers. Remember, we talked about what's going on behind the curtain and presenteeism. You want to be able to have conversations. Look for changes in behavior in your workers. Somebody who maybe had more positive disposition, maybe they're a little bit more negative. Somebody who was a little bit more talkative, maybe they're a little bit less. Walking wounded, right? People not seeking treatment. Any conversation that you have about how things are going will help to counter the effect around stigma. Now, people get worried that I'm trying to make people into therapists. That is not what I'm saying. It's really, how are you doing? No, how are you really doing? And just allowing somebody to say, I'm struggling a bit, and then you're saying, that's okay. And then just take it from there, right? There's also flexibility. Some type of accommodation, perhaps a worker has to go and get their kid tested because, there's been an outbreak at their school. That kind of understanding and flexibility is important. Creativity. I see so many organizations pivot in this really neat direction where they have virtual social hour every week. They've got book clubs. I've seen one where they had a show and tell where it was, you talk about your one favorite place that you travel to and bring out some souvenirs, tell us about it. Art kits. This last one's really feasible if you've got a small group where you just come up with a little art kit, drop it off at people's homes, you get virtually with your glass of wine, cup of tea, or glass of water, whatever it is, your beverage, and just really enjoy some creative time together. What this really does is, because the same mental health COVID research Canadian survey said, positive mental impact, reading, entertainment, creativity. So you don't want to dust off those things as seeing them as not significant when they really are, because people are really desperate to connect in any way that they can. So if an organization or a company can have a place where they can have space for that, it's really, really good. Gestures of kindness. I've been seeing this a lot too, where whether it be, again, dropping off a meal at someone's house, a small gift card, we're getting into the holiday season, maybe if a little bit of time off, an hour or two, so that someone can do a little bit shopping during this time. It's about demonstrating value as a worker. When we're creating mentally healthy workplaces, we're not always talking about therapy and medication. We're talking about a space where people feel safe and they feel valued, and those are hugely beneficial. But not all the responsibilities on the employer too. I think employees have some responsibility too, and being able to be open and with their employer. I always talk about, if I've been struggling, I'll tell my supervisor that, I may not have the best day today. Perhaps tomorrow might be a little bit more productive. I'm just struggling a little bit. Again, it's not a whole therapy session. It's just an acknowledgement that this is just an off day. I'm not really doing too well. Just being able to have that psychologically safe space to do that. Making sure we're using our EAP, AFP, our extended health coverage if that's available, or community resources. And I think that's what I had mentioned. Actually, I'm going to get back to towards the end. I'll expand on that one. Connecting with colleagues. And then the last one I would say on this one is be intentional. Not everything has to be on the employer's shoulder. Create a small social committee, even if it's 2 people, and come up with some of these creative ideas and say, can we get on virtually once a month, once every 2 weeks, and do XYZ? It's about this engagement that we have to have, because that's what breaks stigma, and that's what breaks that loneliness.
That's great. There were a number of things in there that resonated with me. I think, the first one, when you're encouraging leaders to check in with their staff, it's important to do so in a way that's maybe not rushed. I know everybody's really pressed for time right now, but if you're asking the question in a rushed way, chances are you may not get an authentic answer out of that. So just being intentional, I think, with your tone, I think may help draw some people out. EAP is a really great resource that a lot of businesses have, and I think not necessarily all the employees know that it's there or know to access it, or so, if you already have that resource in place, I think it's a really great way to push it and remind employees that it's there for them. At the Chamber, we are launching a walking challenge. So most people have some kind of pedometer. They might have a watch, or they might have an app on their phone, and if they don't, we'll get them a pedometer. We're getting into small teams, so there's some friendly competition. And really, it's a challenge, a step challenge, to try and encourage us to kind of get a little bit away from our screen and get a little bit of exercise, and maybe go outside in some friendly competition, which helps motivate. And like you said, the virtual socials, we have a half an hour every Friday morning. That's just, it's not mandatory. It's in everybody's calendar. If you're free, drop in. It's usually not work talk. It's like what's going on the weekend. It's not going to completely replace the water cooler talk, but it's a little bit of chit chat to kind of help keep things together from a social standpoint.
That's exactly it. And you don't know what's going to land for somebody. I think that's what it is. Don't be afraid to do these things. I know we did one, the social committee did one, and I'm sorry to say this, please don't hate me. I'm not really into Halloween, I'll be honest with you. They said, let's do, and I said, please let us not dress up this year. And they did a pumpkin challenge, and I thought, I'm a little bit creative, and I actually did, and it's gonna be terrible because I have an older teenager son, Frozen, the snowman. I actually did him holding up his head as a pumpkin. So it was kind of like, thank you. I never thought that I'd be able to do that. But again, there was 2 people who were the social committee. They brought it up. So you just don't know what's going to land. So I like that, because we need to be a little bit braver and just throw it out there.
Yeah. And I think being flexible, like you said, and being empathetic, and realizing that people right now have a lot on their plate, and they are employees, but they are also parts of families where that's also pulling attention. And so I think just the openness and flexibility and the empathy will go a long way.
That's exactly it.
So in closing, do you have any takeaways for us?
Yeah, I just have a couple of takeaways, and for the most part, the takeaways I think are repetitions of what we just actually talked about. And I'm gonna, we're all in this together. Now, I have been taken to task for the statement, which is okay. I don't mind being taken to task because it opens up conversation. When I say we're all in this together, it's actually not meant to indicate that our experiences are exactly alike. What I mean by this, because it's a global pandemic, unlike a natural disaster. So if a natural disaster happened in some part of our country, only those people there and, would experience that. But we're all having the same kind of going through the same uneasiness and concern. So that's what I mean when I say we're all listening together. It's affecting you, your business, your clients, your customers, your workers, family members who live with you across town, across the world, neighbors, and a KW region. That's how I define it when I say we're all experiencing this in one shape or format or another. Another takeaway, just recognize the times that we're in, recognizing it for your business, for yourself, and for your employees. Combat stigma and encourage reaching out for help. And this, again, is just this wonderful repetition of what we just talked about, Allison, which is we want to reduce this notion of the working wounded and presenteeism by sharing with everybody EFAP and community resources. Our community has amazing resources, sliding scale fee therapy, and it's not, and I know a lot of EFAPs and our local community resources, it's not just counseling. There's counseling for kids, for teenagers, parenting courses, debt counseling, diet, diet and nutrition. There's a whole array of things that we really want people to avail themselves of. When we talk about those socials and whatnot, throw in a lunch and learn every so often, a mini one, even if you only have 2 or 3 employees, talk about something that is kind of self-helpish and in that mental health realm. Remind your employees that treatment has also pivoted. Virtual care. Therapy is available virtual, which kind of you could sort of sneak into your schedule, even from a work from home position as well too. Another takeaway I would say, this is not the time to be a hero. When I tell this all the time to almost everybody I come in contact with, because we have to remember that when COVID hit us here in Canada, it was the spring. So we were just swinging into warmer weather, brighter days going outside. We are now swinging into shorter days, darker. January and February are already challenging months as is without anything else. So this is not the time to be a hero. Establish new routines, limit your exposure to media, use technology to stay connected, take care of your body and physical activity, find ways to have fun. And I'm going to conclude on this. And when I, normally when I do presentations, I've got all this stats and all this wonderful stuff, but I was moved by this, and here's my conclusion and my takeaway. I think there's currently a throwback to a simple and meaningful gestures. I took my son out for breakfast. And of course, it was a new place. You grab your cutlery at the front of the door. Like it's always, again, there's that openness to how is this going to work. And when the waitress sat us down, she actually looked at us and said, "Thank you so much for coming." Really meaningful, like, thank you for coming in, because despite the restrictions, we're still able to go in for breakfast. And it was very limited. It was very, very few people. And then towards the end, when she was giving me coffee, she said, "What's your favorite Christmas movie?" So we started to have a conversation. And she said, and I don't know if it's because I'm a therapist, people always talk to me, but she said, "You know what? I've had a really rough year. I've almost gone bankrupt. A bunch of things have happened in my life. But I put up my Christmas tree. Can I show you my Christmas tree?" She took out her phone and showed me her Christmas tree and the decorations and what it meant to her. And I thought that was interesting. I came home, found out some other friends of mine had put up Christmas tree. My neighbor put up their Christmas tree, and I thought, wow, from the lens of mental health, it's people wanting a visual, whether it be Christmas tree or anything else, a decoration. It could be art, it could be anything in your life. It does not have to be that. This particular conversation was about Christmas, but we've been without normal for a very long time in terms of our vacations, how our children ended school, how our children started school, gatherings, what they have looked like, what they will look like. And from a mental health point of view, right now it's really about being creative, being flexible, and being kind. And these are things that really are going to impact our mental health. Reducing stigma by having open conversations, seeking help when needed, and supporting each other's. Those are critical, critical, critical things that we need to be engaging on an ongoing basis.
Great. Thank you so much, Jillian. Just a reminder for anybody who has questions for Jillian, please put them into the questions box. And so we did have one question come in. Do you have any tips on how to separate work from home? Like in terms of work life and maybe your personal life. And I would suspect that that is even more challenging for people who are working from home.
Yeah, close the laptop. like literally, I would actually keep my laptop open and sort of pop in, because there's always this danger of popping in after the kids go to bed, or popping in after laundry, or popping, going in a little bit early. This is boundaries. Boundaries are really, really huge. They're important for mental health. So you have to know your dedicated times, and you have to honor those dedicated times. The work will always be there. So close your laptop. If you're in a physical location, if you can't close the door, because not everybody has the luxury of having an office door, literally close it. If it's if you have a monitor set up, you want to shut it down, turn off the lights, take your paperwork, close the paperwork. Don't leave it open and inviting, because then you're always going to feel guilty when you walk past it. So you don't want to have any physical indication that there's work. So even if your desk is in your bedroom, you want to make sure everything is shut down. Maybe move some things around. So put a plant in front of it, so that at least when you're not working, it's not calling out at you.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you mentioned before, when we were talking about some of the different things that businesses might be able to do for their employees, and not really sure what's going to land with different, because everybody's different. So if there's a business who's interested in maybe taking some steps towards implementing something for their employees, how would you suggest they start? Is it a good idea to survey employees? What are some tips to just get them started?
I think you want to survey, because you want to do something that's meaningful to them. And the best way to find out if something's meaningful to your audience, like any good business knows, right? They would know that, what does my audience need? What am I selling, or what service? It's the same thing for your workers. Ask them what would be meaningful. Now, you might come back with crickets chirping. So then you might want to come in with some ideas. Are we looking at something creative, something physical, something like a challenge, or do you want something more informative? Like, do we want to do some self-help stuff? I'm not too sure where you want, or do we do a rotation of them? So sometimes you go in with nothing, or sometimes you go in with some options, because sometimes people's no indicates their yes.
Interesting. Jen, I'm not sure if we have any more questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. As we're going into the winter, and as you mentioned, days are shorter, there's more darkness. And added on top of that, people have pandemic fatigue, which could look different for everybody. So I'm just wondering, are there some things, any tips that individuals can implement to kind of help them not only through the pandemic, but also through the winter months?
Be intentional. Be prepared.
Okay.
Don't be surprised. We know we're going into it. This is the time I'll tell my friends, jigsaw puzzles. Again, going old school. There's even Lego for adults, reminiscent, right? Maybe there's some books you want to get to. Maybe there's that hobby you've wanted to do. Not everything has to come with a big cost as well, too. I'm also mindful, cognizant. We've got different types of financial means for everybody. But even if it's Netflix, decide what are you going to be your binge-worthy, and then be intentional, pace yourself, because what you don't want to do is be surprised. Make most of the light. Maybe your lunches, maybe your walking will actually happen in the daytime. So I think if you can be intentional and set out, here are the hobbies, here are the things I've always wanted to do, here are the projects around the house, or like I said, jigsaw puzzles, games, things like that. They're really big. So I would really be intentional and purposeful.
Okay, that's great. And what I have found has helped for me a little bit is really thinking about the positives. And I know that some people struggle to find the positives in the pandemic, and the pandemic has impacted people very differently. But what are some of the good things? And so for me personally, because we're not running around to hockey and all those things, we're actually spending some more quality family time together, and I feel that we're closer. And so, I'm trying when I'm struggling, I try to kind of focus on the positives, and I find that it helps me a little bit.
Yeah, and now sometimes people can't find the positive, especially if you're experiencing depression. So here's the, some people ask, well, what's the difference? And so if you're able to find positives, do the gratitude journal, whatever it is that you do. But if you're finding I'm trying, and I can't get out, then it might be more of a severity. You might have a condition where you now want to talk to your healthcare provider with, and maybe talk to a professional about. So there's always that little bit of that line between, sort of feeling like I can do this and I really can't. I've been trying, but I just thought of that just when you said the positive, because that tends to be a little bit of a hallmark in terms of whether somebody's struggling with a significant mental health condition versus, like you said, can we find the positive in some of those affirmations and just podcasts, there's books, there's some really great places that we can go that will help lift us up. But then I would also say, on the other hand, is if you're saying you also need to be brave enough to be able to say I'm struggling.
Yes. Yeah. Which can be very, very difficult.
Yes.
Very difficult.
Yes. I think I've said it.
Yes. Jillian, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You have shared amazing information that I think will be helpful to a lot of people. Again, I want to thank our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, the Immigration Partnership, and again, our speaker today, which is Jillian Wells. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, to everybody who attended today's webinar, as a reminder, we host the Business Success Series every Wednesday at 1. And next Wednesday, we hear from David Norton as he walks us through the guidelines and the criteria for the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. And we hope to see you then. For full details, please visit the Chamber website. Please share this series with friends and colleagues. Join us every Wednesday afternoon for the next edition of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce Business Success Series, brought to you by our title sponsor, Manulife, our platinum sponsor, Immigration Partnership. Because it's Wednesday, it's Business Success Series. Thanks again, Jillian, and for everybody for joining us.
Thank you.